Osiris.
We're mass communicating. Mass communicating. Mass communicating.
Welcome back to Touchdowns All Day. I'm your host, Max Dawson, flying solo this week as BARBER decompresses following the conclusion of Phase 1 of the Disco Biscuits Summer 2024 tour. As we all catch our breath and try to make sense of everything that went down in the last few weeks, I thought now would be a great time to release the next installment of Everybody Plays a Role, our ongoing series highlighting the contributions of the women and men who work tirelessly behind the scenes to produce the Disco Biscuits music, visuals, and live performances. Before we get to that interview, a few housekeeping notes. If you're listening to this podcast, you're already well aware that the Biscuits are heading to Alaska. Yes, that's right. In September 2025, the Disco Biscuits and Friends will be setting sail for Alaska aboard the inaugural Sea Bisco cruise. Sea Bisco will take place from September 9th to 15th, 2025, sailing from Seattle, Washington to Alaska and back. Everyone listening to this episode needs to head over to seabisco.tbits.me. There you're going to find more info and, crucially, you're going to have the opportunity to sign up to be amongst the first people to secure priority access to pre-sale cabins. I'm very much looking forward to seeing you on board. I assure you, it's going to be an adventure of titanic proportions. As always, I encourage you, if you're enjoying the podcast, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. While you're at it, please share an episode with a friend. It's a great way to spread the word about Touchdowns All Day and all the great stuff going on with the Disco Biscuits in 2024. And finally, we want to hear from you. Got a tour story for an upcoming installment of I Remember When? Have some Biscuits covers you'd like BARBER and the rest of the band to hear? Or just want to leave your feedback for me and BARBER? There are plenty of ways to get in touch. First, there's the Touchdowns All Day hotline, 424-666-SIYD, number to call. Leave us a voicemail and make sure to leave your name and where you're calling from. You can also reach us on Instagram at Touchdowns All Day, at BARBER Shreds, or at FY Maxwell, and on X at TDAD Baby. All right, let's get to it. Today, in our next installment of the ongoing series, Everybody Plays a Role, our guest is one of the newest members of the Disco Biscuits road crew. That's Ben Travers. Ben joined the band in 2024 as the Biscuits keyboard and bass tech, and he is the man who is responsible for helping Aaron and Mark shape the sounds that are such integral components of the Biscuits in 2024. Anyone who's been paying attention this year knows that Mark has been on his Moog bass more than ever, and that Aaron is really pushing the limits of his rig through the incorporation of samples, side chains, and all sorts of other exciting new sounds. Ben is a critical part of that, but more than that, Ben is a great interview. He's a thoughtful, intelligent, well-spoken guy who has quite an amazing and inspiring story. I was really taken aback by Ben's personal narrative about how he came to work in the industry, how he landed his job with the Disco Biscuits, and all of the hard work that he puts into keeping Mark and Aaron's instruments in tip-top shape. So, without any further ado, let's get to it. Ben Travers, Everybody Plays a Role, Touchdowns All Day. Ben, welcome to Touchdowns All Day.
Hey, Max. How are you?
I'm well. So, Ben, the first thing I wanted to ask you is about your background and your life story prior to joining the Biscuits organization. So maybe start out with where you are, where you're from, and your general personal musical biography.
Okay. Well, I've been in the music industry since like 2005. I've lived in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania most of my life. I started off at a music venue called the River Street Jazz Cafe. And during that time, I started at a dishwashing position and over several years worked my way up to general manager. And during that time there, that stint, I was also going to school for audio recording and learning music business. And then I got promoted to general manager there. And I was also doing sound and, getting more involved with the business aspect of things. But I always had kind of an itch to go on the road and travel. And I was always seeing bands come in every week. And I just decided I have to find some way to be able to travel the world for free. And I was seeing crews come in every week and just kind of showing me that it was definitely possible to work with the band and travel. And I started touring in 2010 with a Zappa tribute band, and I started with just doing merch and kind of learning the ropes and kind of being, observing and seeing, what else I could really help out and do as a roadie, as they would say. But I'm also a drummer, so I had kind of the gravitation towards drum teching. And one gig kind of just led to another where I had an opportunity to drive some gear around. And then that led to me drum teching for said drummer and going just from gig to gig. And I learned early on in my career that, just don't ever really limit yourself to one paycheck. So if something kind of comes your way that's in your wheelhouse or even something a little bit out that could be a challenge, you can still get comfortable with that. And that could be a new said career path and or just another, check. But for me, I always kind of gravitated towards audio and drum teching. And then later on in my career, especially the last couple of years, I've been doing more of the keyboard teching and drum teching with monitors as well. But it went kind of fast in the last 15 years, on the road as it does. But I would say the last 5 years, 5 or 6 years, I've been working with the band Twiddle. And they recently went on hiatus last November, and they're under the same management as the Disco Biscuits. And my name got thrown into the hat when they were looking for a new keyboard/bass tech. And I auditioned in, I think, late December or early December of last year. And then I started with them this January.
Amazing. I have
so much in the in between, but that is a quick, synopsis.
Well, let's roll back to the fact that you're a drummer, which is surprising to me. I thought maybe you'd say you're a pianist or a bass player, considering what your job with the Biscuits is. Are you still actively playing the drums these days?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I practice on my own. I used to have a duo, like a keyboard and drums duo, but we don't really play anymore. Our schedules kind of always overlap and conflict, but I do find myself at least practicing a couple times a week and just kind of shedding to some drumless tracks on Spotify just to kind of keep my chops up and stuff. And it's always, a good release.
Was there any particular style of music or genre that you were playing primarily?
I think more in the instrumental rock, like shoegazy kind of vibe, like indie rock kind of stuff. Um, More like, emotional kind of rock, not emo in a way, but more like that kind of drumming. And then also, I always like really dug like Four on the Floor and, the more unsy kind of dancey vibe. That was always fun too.
Well, what is the path that took you from playing drums in shoegaze or instrumental rock bands to the world of jam bands, to Twiddle and eventually the Biscuits?
I think jam band was always kind of in me since I started at the music venue, in 2005. It was more of a jam band scene there where there was bands like Lotus starting out and Brothers Pass coming through, and a lot of Grateful Dead bands and stuff, and Fish tribute bands. And I kind of got my taste for like the jam scene there. And then I started early in my career working with the Kimmocks, whether it was Johnny Kimmock or Steve Kimmock, his dad. And I was doing front of house for Steve, drum teching for Johnny. That led to me working with Mike Gordon as the drum and percussion tech for Johnny. And then at the same time, I also got a opportunity working for Joe Russo's Almost Dead, drum teching for Joe. So that kind of like opened me up to different kind of jam worlds. And then I got the job with Twiddle, and Twiddle lasted for 5+ years, and they are one of the top jam bands of 2010s or however you want to put it. So I saw a lot of other jam bands with that opportunity and playing a lot of festivals, and I was on Jam Cruise a couple times, so I got my full gambit of jam music, and then it just really came into kind of a crazy fruition that I, working with the Disco Biscuits, which are in the same realm, but they're in their own kind of world completely, and that I already knew several of the crew, and so it just kind of felt like another level of comfort and home,
So what was that first exposure you had to the Disco Biscuits?
I think it was probably a side project of theirs, maybe. If not, it was very early, Disco Biscuit, Camp Bisco up at Montage. Not being behind the scenes or anything, just experiencing them, at their festival. And then, just knowing Aaron and Mark just from kind of other projects, whether it was working with Everyone Orchestra or seeing them kind of on the road, and stuff like that.
Would you consider yourself to have been a Biscuits fan prior to joining the crew?
I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say that I was a fan, just because I really didn't listen to them much. It wasn't really my my cup of tea or like in my wheelhouse. And then it's funny, a lot of the bands that I have worked for over my career, I never really listened to prior. And then I was able to become, as I am right now, a more organic fan and see it from a whole different like way, which is nice.
So your background is as a drummer, drum tech primarily, but you're learning on the job all aspects of the music business. And I think if we can pause right there and just say, for anyone in the audience who's ever wondered what it might be like to work in the business, I think your career trajectory is a pretty great example of the right way to do it. And that is to never say no to a job, to learn, to show up, to shadow people. You said you started out on merch and somehow you managed to work pretty much every job, it sounds like, on a touring crew in the process. So the question I have is, though, how do you go from a drum tech to a bass and keyboard tech? And are the skills transferable, or did it require you to learn new instruments, learn new technology, learn an entirely new way of doing your job?
I think, definitely a part of the job is to be, open eyes and ears and mouth shut for a lot of the times, and definitely when you're learning a new craft or skill set, to really just jump in and just try to be a sponge. I was lucky to have a great crew, the Disco Biscuit crew that there is now presently, and the one that I was taking over for, to really teach me exactly the ins and outs. Because what you really learn is that, the gig and touring, it's a very small percentage of really just the gig. That they're only up there for X amount of hours. So a lot of the other stuff is just as important, if not more. But I would say with hopping on with the bass, which I really didn't have much experience or prior experience to, just, barely kind of bass teching for John Wetton of the band UK. He was famous for playing in Asia and stuff like that. But it was just very minimal. Nothing close to my duties with Mark. But from going from drum teching to keyboard tech kind of just comes, again, like how you said, not to really say no. And I've always just believed in to be as cross-trained as possible, because you just never know what can particularly happen. And from my experience of working and running a music venue, I started off as a dishwasher, and I did janitor, and I was the cook, and I was, the accountant and all that stuff. So if anyone didn't show up, I was able to fill those shoes. And for a good team, whether you are in the top or the bottom, you want to be able to do all of those things to have a smooth running engine. And when you're on tour, and you're on tour for whether it's one day for a festival or for like 3 weeks, it has to be running on all cylinders. So if everyone can fill in at certain times for any other reason or variable, it really makes for a really just a really fun time at that point, because then everything is particularly working. The band is happy, which makes the crew happy, and then the band's making the crowd happy and reciprocal, and then it's just all, we're putting on a rock show at that point, and then it all makes sense, and then it doesn't really feel like a job at that point. But to answer your question, I went from like just saying, yeah, sure, I could set up keyboards, because I also love playing keys. I love synths. Like I love making sounds and noises and stuff. So that always kind of came a little bit easier to me. I always was really good at like Legos or like Connects and, just puzzle kind of stuff. So setting up like bigger keyboard rigs or bigger drum kits kind of, I always found it more fun and interesting. So I had an opportunity to set up Terry Bozzio's drum kit in the past, and that's like the world's largest drum kit. And then I was also able to work with Pat Metheny the last couple of years and tech for Chris Fishman, who has a really big keyboard rig, and in the past tech for Robert Walter, who plays with Mike Gordon, and he has a pretty extensive rig. But Aaron kind of brought me more into and concentrating and learning the MIDI world. And that has been a fun ride, and something that, I've had a lot of just overall excitement to learn something new and kind of add something else to like my skill set and, wheelhouse in general.
Well, that versatility that you described, being able in a pinch to move over and help problem solve something that's going on with the drums, or alternatively with the monitors or the computers. And we'll get to some of the things that I learned when I was researching this. Mark talking about devices and things that you rigged up for him that solved problems that maybe he didn't even know could be solved. But before we get to that, let's just, for the general audience who may be not that familiar with what your duties entail, give us just a basic overview of your job. Like, what's the basic job description of keyboard and bass tech for the Disco Biscuits?
Okay. Overall, day to day, I'm taking care of all of Aaron's and Mark's, needs and wants on the stage. I set up their equipment pretty much, hopefully, the same way every single day, so they can just pretty much go to their instrument and perform, and they don't have to think about anything but just the set list in front of them, or sometimes luckily not the set list at all, and they can just play. I have specific gear, obviously, per artist that I set up, and they have specific wants and needs that the way they want it set up, or that they need to have it set up. And I have it now pretty dialed in after doing several tours with them and kind of making it more of my own, that I've made it easier for myself, but then in return made it easier for them to just be able to go up there and just kind of get to work.
So one of our listeners wrote in with a question, and that was, and this is from Sean Demeter. He said, wait, one guy does both Aaron and Mark? That seems like a lot of work. And I had the same response. Alan and John each have their own personal techs. We've spoken with Nick, and he's described the work that he does with John. Yet Mark and Aaron share you. Is there a reason why that bass and keys are paired together within the crew organizational flowchart of the Disco Biscuits?
I'm not sure if it's just specific to the Disco Biscuits. I've worked with several organizations where there's always double duty, sometimes triple duty. A lot of the times it's monitors and something else, and or you can double duty drums and percussion and stuff like that. With Twiddle, I was the monitor engineer and drum tech. So, but mainly because monitors were on the drum side. So if there's anything that went on with the drums during the show, I was right there and had easy access to help out. It would be quite difficult if I was across the stage, or if I was working with an instrument that took more of my attention or had guitar changes and stuff. Sure. But with drums and with bass and keys, I think the Biscuits have always had it set up as the stage right tech. Not just specific to bass and keys, but it's just because they're both on stage right side, and John has always had his own person, and Alan as well. But also Alan's drum tech in the past has doubled as stage manager, so they had double duty as well.
Gotcha.
All of us and everyone on stage, including Brian, our monitor engineer, have a lot going on. I think we all pick up, even though Nick only says he's the guitar tech, he has many hats, and so does Amin and myself, and Brian wears the most. But with taking care of Mark and Aaron, I think just with like anything, it's in life or any job, it becomes a routine. And you just have to find something that works, for you. I have said this many times, even with other crew guys. It's just kind of a recipe. And I found a recipe that works, putting, together Mark and Aaron stuff. And now it's just like you don't mess with it. You can perfect it a little bit. You don't really, maybe a sprinkle of this, a sprinkle of that. But you don't really. Now I have a good flow. And as long as you kind of take your time and you have your way of remembering things, because there's a lot of things to plug in and make sure, you get better at it like every gig, but then especially with my experience over the last 15 years and working with other, bigger rigs and or multiple artists at the same time, you just have to find, like I said, like a common flow, like a good flow for yourself,
So let's start with the Aaron part of your job, as to me, it would seem to be the most complex. And now I mentioned I solicited questions from the community. One of the first questions that came back was from Aaron himself, who asked, ask Ben, will my rig be the most efficient rig in the history of the band this summer? And I wanted to know, what does Aaron mean by that? What's new about Aaron's rig for this summer? Why is it more efficient?
I think slowly but surely since January, since I've taken over, I like to streamline things. So I feel like over time, especially with multiple techs and or just, the gigs just going on, there could be just fluff. There could just be things that just don't need to particularly be there. whether it's maybe a keyboard that we're not using all the time or pedals that could be changed out. But I think Aaron was more maybe speaking of efficient, being that when he comes up to his keyboard rig, everything is particularly working and flowing as he needs to for his workflow, and that there's not more of a thinking game. We've been working on stuff, making easier hotkeys and using his APC in different ways, as well as his virus keyboard, where he can do different stuff with looping and just make it overall more efficient for him, just so he can kind of get to where he wants to go that much faster. And just kind of streamlining his rig overall made my life easier for the crew and tech guys out there, making looms and labeling everything, and kind of just cutting down on a lot of the stuff that just didn't need to particularly be there. And I love labels. I love marking carpets. I just like making my job and my life easier with just being able to kind of like plug and play or just drop stuff and it's ready to go. And I think overall my efficiency and, Aaron's want to make his life and or gig life easier is where efficiency comes from.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the APC and the virus, and we're going to get into all of those individual devices in a moment, but I wanted to start out by asking if you could just give a rundown of Aaron's current full rig. There are rig rundown videos for Aaron on the internet. I think the most recent one, however, is from 2020. And I know that his stage setup has changed quite considerably. And I'm sure it's changed even more since you've been on the job. I look at Aaron's setup and it makes my head spin. I remember back when I first started seeing the band, Aaron had 3 keyboards and it was seen to be extraordinarily excessive. He's got a synthesizer, he's got an electric piano, and he has an organ. Oh my God. Now Aaron is surrounded on basically 4 sides. He's got a computer, he's got samplers, he's got more keyboards that I can count. So give us just a current rundown of the state of Aaron's rig as of June 2024.
As of Electric Forest,
yes.
He's on an 8x8 riser. He has 6 keyboards, plenty of synths. He also has an XK5 organ, which is going to a Leslie speaker. He also has a virus synth on top of that, which also has the APC MIDI controller that's going to his MacBook Pro. Has several delay pedals. We also are running a vocal mic into the computer so he can process his vocals in real time via the Ableton and APC. Everything in his world is running back into a mixer, and out of that mixer is going to Brian and then to Rich. It's creating more of a more me world. So when he wants to hear more of himself in his ears, he has control via his mixer. I would say most of the keyboards get used every night, especially every song and improvs and jams, and concentrated as of late on the Yamaha Montage, which is pretty much everything you could dream of, but it has all of his grand piano sounds, all of his electric piano sounds, and you can sculpt things in real time, and there's tons of different parameter changes, and we have a really beautiful delay pedal with that. And then as well as Mark and Barber, Aaron has a side compression pedal. So when they decide on going into some of these more unsy kind of vibe songs, with the wobble, he can turn these pill pedals on and create that sound and be able to bring it in and out, whether it's with the virus or with the Montage. Everything could be looped via the APC. The Prophet the montage and the virus all could be looped in the APC, not the organ and the other two synths. He has a vocal mic, and then he also has a vocoder mic on the V synth that he can control and do some vocoder sounds and whatnot. Oh, and he did have a keytar for one show. We did bring that out for the show in New York City for the album release party. We made it wireless, so he was able to just go out and not be tethered.
Well, Pudge Low writes, how difficult and how much time does it take to set up Magner's rig each show? Being a keyboard player myself, it used to take me up to 2 hours to set up for some shows, unfortunately. Just wondering how long it takes Ben to get the entire setup stage ready.
I mean, there is some variables, but if it is a, the push count, or like, we're not talking about what it takes to get the gear out of the truck and push it onto stage and wait for your turn and all that stuff. If I have all my gear in front of me, I'm sitting on a riser, I can set up Aaron's rig within 30 minutes.
Wow.
I had an opportunity, last tour, that there was a couple times where I had to fill in for drum tech as well. So I was setting up keyboards, bass, and drums, and I had to kind of find I had to kind of dial in my time because I was only allotted so much. So, spending each amount of time in each department, you kind of, or doing it over and over again, you kind of like get better and better at it. So, but, sometimes if I can just take my time, it depends, but at a festival as of late, and or like when we're just setting up, I try to do it, within 35 minutes or something like that.
Now, I'm going to preface this by saying it's an impossible question to answer, but what's the most important device in Aaron's entire rig? The one that if you took it away, he wouldn't be Aaron Magner anymore.
As of late, I would say it's the tie between the virus or montage. But like, I think when it comes to his like thing, it is right now the virus.
Well, tell me about the virus, because I've always been curious about it. I notice more often than not, it is his primary focus. But what's so strange to me is it's 36 keys. It is a very compact unit. It doesn't have the full, what is the word I'm looking here? Scale of keys,
octave range, but
the full octave range.
Sure. Key bed count, but you could also, with the power of that is that you can just change your octaves. So you can get the full, obviously, octave range, but you're only allotted the 37 keys, in front of you. It is a digital synth, but it just has some magic in it. I think it's one of those keyboards, especially now with a company that doesn't really exist anymore, and there is no updates for it, and there's kind of just these online forums and people making third-party softwares and stuff like that. It's kind of like this hidden gem. I think a lot of keyboards have that one sound, but the virus has more than that one sound. It has the warmth of analog, but then it has really crazy controls with their parameters. And, now being at least like the last 6 months being side stage and seeing Aaron more, in depth, I could see why that's always been kind of in his arsenal. That's the one keyboard that he'll want to travel with. I would call them like the desert island, like stuff, like what you want to bring out to the desert island. And I think that's one keyboard that he would definitely do that with.
And does the virus allow him to process or filter and other ways affect the other keyboards that are in his rig?
Well, he does have the control of recording a loop with said virus and then exploring the parameters within that loop while it's looping. But now he's discovered a new mode of it's called multi-mode. So instead of only being able to record one sound at a time per channel, now he's broken it up to 16 individual channels. So now you're recording 16 individual loops with the virus, with 16 different sounds, and being able to control the parameters with those 16 channels. So it can get really funky and fun. And we have it now routed back to the APC so he can have full control over the volume. So once he makes a couple loops, he can bring the loops in and out very DJ like with, bringing the volumes up and down and whatnot.
Okay, so let's move on to the APC next, because you mentioned its importance and its capabilities, but just for novices like myself, explain what the APC is and what it does.
It's just a really, really great mappable MIDI controller that works really well with Ableton, and Aaron specifically uses Ableton, and it makes his life looping a lot easier, and where he can save samples and produce samples into Ableton and then be able to trigger them via the APC. But the APC is just laid out in a really perfect way, just like Ableton is, with colors and blocks, that it just makes it really easy, especially in a live setting where it could be really dark stages, tons of haze, all of that. But you can see where you are, especially when you have to drop that special sample, when you need to.
Okay, so would it be fair to say that the APC is what allows Aaron to control Ableton, which is via his laptop?
Yes, indeed. Yep. And then
Great.
We've also added a Stream Deck into the mix, where they use Stream Decks in many different ways. People use them for gaming, other podcasting. It's all it is another sort of MIDI controller that you can map to do things that you want to do by just simply pressing buttons. So you could map the button to do whatever you kind of want it to do. So in this podcast, if you wanted to just press the button to start and stop the recording, you could make it do that. So Aaron has that for some special things during the show as well.
Let's come back to that, because I definitely noticed Aaron posted a video of himself playing with the Stream Deck and describing it as the next evolution of the awesome button, which is a subject we've talked about in a lot of depth on Touchdowns All Day. But before we get there, I've got a few other questions that the audience submitted about the APC and virus. Gregory Visky wrote in and said, I saw a video of my buddy Jules Jensen doing something with the MIDI controller connected to Magner's virus. I'd love an in-depth look into what they were diving into. I saw that video as well. It was between Soulshine and Electric Forest. What exactly were you guys working on? Aaron seemed to be very excited about this.
During or in the in between of those two festivals, I was lucky enough to acquire a new stage laptop, and we were just kind of going over his Ableton file and, as he would say, making it more efficient and streamlining it, taking away some of the things that just didn't need to be in that file anymore. I met Jules, I don't know, I would say 3 or 4 months ago, maybe, or so, in Boston. And he's just an Ableton guru. He's just the doctor, and he kind of knows the ins and outs. And his brain is just someone that you just kind of want to attach to and learn as much as you can when you're kind of in that presence. So I invited him down to Philly, and we worked at the warehouse for a bit. And I set up Aaron's whole rig, and we worked a whole day just kind of working on the Ableton file and taking some of the notes that Aaron wanted to, again, just, touching back just to kind of make his workflow easier. So when you're in the moment, it's less thinking of where things are and you're just doing, and that's part muscle memory, but that's part also making things easier, easier to find, easier to do, easier to trigger, however you want to kind of phrase it. And so we spent time with the virus because what I was just talking about with the multi-mode, Aaron wanted that to be something that he could use at Electric Forest. So Jules and I worked on that and just made sure that everything was working accordingly. And that's the video I think you saw on Instagram, and hopefully what you heard, in the recording on Electric Forest, because he was using it.
Do you have any moments from Electric Forest that come to mind as emblematic of him using these new multi-mode capabilities?
Usually, it's a good sign if when he's doing one of these things, I notice that he's specifically on the virus and he looks over stage right over to me and he kind of gives me a smile. I know that things are working, and there's always room for improvement. Aaron and I talk often of just like, it's just small steps and we're kind of just like cleaning out the clutter, right now. So, there's always, for me, perfection kind of in mind, but I have to remind myself that like slow progress is still progress. So little by little, we're, it's definitely getting better and better. And with Jules's help, the other day, I really feel like the rig is great. The rig is great right now.
Why don't we take a quick listen to a segment from Electric Forest that showcases the complexity of what you and Aaron are achieving up there?
That's great.
So I would imagine the sample is an example of him controlling Ableton from the APC. Do I hear sidechain compression happening there as well? I almost felt like I heard the ducking in sync with the kick drum. What are some of the other things I'm hearing, or even just tell me if I'm mistaking things?
No, you're spot on. I would say there is some side compression going on, as well as triggering that vocal sample from Ableton, and then if there is a riser and or a buildup in there, that's being triggered from Ableton, but using the Stream Deck. So he could have kind of separate worlds. So if he is doing samples and or loops, he could just have his risers and stuff like that from the Stream Deck. And I think that Mark was just playing the bass there. Yeah, that's what I hear too.
In the country, maybe the world.
The complexity of what Aaron is doing seems to only increase. And so obviously the efficiency and the streamlining that you're working on introducing and refining is probably a godsend for him. But I guess I'm just curious about, have you ever had a situation arise where Aaron has wanted to do something and you've just felt like, I don't know if that's technically possible? Are you kind of pushing up against the limits? Because I can't imagine Aaron doing any more, spinning any more plates, operating any more devices, but yet he continuously, each tour, seems to add new sounds, new devices, new techniques to the mix.
Mm-hmm. I think that there's always, the level of how much you can push the envelope. And I think Aaron and the Disco Biscuits in general have been always pushing that technology envelope since they started. They've always been kind of the pioneers with that as well. I don't know if there's anything that, Aaron has suggested that I haven't thought, like there's some workaround, or there's somebody that I know that I could potentially call and I could help figure this out. But there might be that time. But as of late, there's been a lot of times where I can call upon the other crew guys who are all very knowledgeable, not just in their craft, but in other skill sets as well. And then I have a bunch of peers and friends and stuff on the road that are all working kind of in the same vein as pushing technology, especially today and on stage, and hopefully in trying to make it work every single night flawlessly, which is a miracle, but we're trying.
Yeah. Since you joined the band, Aaron has really rediscovered his love of samples. And I want to know, is this just a coincidence, or have you been in any way a part of Aaron's renewed use of samples?
I don't think I've been involved with him using more samples. I just hope that, if anything, that I've just been able to fill the shoes, as other techs have, been there, but also just as made him as comfortable as he could, really be, and as free as he could be, where then in return he feels more at ease to use maybe more samples or play this keyboard more or whatever, because he's just not thinking about other things. So I don't think in any way I'm a cause of him using more samples, but I do hope that I am making his his stage life easier.
I would imagine that's probably the most important thing that you can do in your job, is to make his job easier.
Really it comes to, other than the gear working every night, there's a lot of just, every artist has their own, kind of peccadillos, and, it's just kind of like things to remember that's just not particularly the gig or the gear related kind of things. And, it's just, again, you want to be, keep things light and fun, and they should really, an artist should just be able to, again, just go up to their device, their instrument, and just kind of be free. And sometimes I feel like, it's easier times than others to be able to do that for a bunch of different variables, but at the end of the day, we just have to be able to have them come up and just play.
So back to the Stream Deck. You mentioned that he has recently introduced this into his rig. It allows him to trigger some of the risers and downshifters very quickly. How did you set that up? What did you preload into it? What sort of capabilities are you excited about exploring now that the Stream Deck is part of the mix?
I love this. I love the Stream Deck, and I think that the capabilities and the possibilities are kind of not limited, but it's exactly what we needed for what he wanted to do, separate than having to use the laptop and or the APC, to have some separate capabilities. And you could also map it to do other things. Rich Hartramp, our front of house engineer, uses one at front of house to trigger some plugins that he's using at front of house on and off, and he suggested to me that I integrate it into Aaron's rig, and I suggested it to Aaron, and he's like, yeah, let's try it. So we bought one, and Aaron took it home and kind of just started just trying to find certain things that he would be able to use or want to use in a quick way. And the downshifters and the risers are just perfect for that, because he doesn't have to take it up or take the screen up on the laptop or have to go to it per se and have to toggle things, especially when he's doing other things or setting up another keyboard patch. And then on the APC, he can just leave that to where his samples are. So it's just a quick grab and he's downshifting or rising.
On the subject of conjuring up the right sound at the right time, over on Fantasy Tour, Inhale to Yoni wrote, how does Magner decide what patches he wants pre-programmed? Like, is he planning that before the tour or on a show-by-show basis? I'd imagine he changes things up depending on what he plans on playing. But how does Magner build sounds and have them ready whenever he needs them? What makes him gravitate toward certain sounds and effects? So I've often wondered that myself. How does he know how to bring up that patch? He's got a split second. He's playing something on the organ and he's got to turn, 90 degrees and immediately in a dark room with smoke in his eyes, bring up the right sound at the right time.
I think, that's the magic. Especially with improv, where you're not going in and you have a set patch in mind for each song or each change, whether it's a chorus or and he has 6 keyboards to work with. But I think that's just the magic with Aaron being like kind of a synth master. He has things in his brain that he knows that specific vibe of songs or certain energy of a song will gravitate maybe to a certain sound or a patch. And he's also had a lot of these, keyboards and synths for a while, so he knows them in and out pretty well. And he's made his life easier by having presets where he wants them. So it's a little bit easier to go to and from. But overall, I think it's just, doing it for a really, really long time and it just kind of being in him, just like he's just built kind of like that. Some keyboard players, want more of they just work with 4 or 5 patches, or maybe they just have one keyboard and that's the only thing they really explore. But I think Aaron really loves to just kind of be in the moment and kind of see where not only the song or the improv or the crowd takes him, but where that keyboard or patch specifically might take him.
Does the set list influence your job in any way? In other words, do you need to prepare things differently for a show if they're going to play Caves, or if C2B is going to be in the set list, or fill in the blank?
There's a couple moves, like if they are going to be playing maybe say more of a tractor beam vibe of a set, I will be more ready to take Mark's bass from him so he can go right to his Moog synthesizer. If there are something in the set where he's going to be singing at the Moog, I need to have a certain set list and or lyrics for him on that side. But most of the time it's always specific, kind of the same. And then per day, getting their designated iPads ready for the set. And then anything for that day that they might say that they need and or something that it might change or to get ready. Sometimes as of late, I will get, Aaron will tell me to kind of get the first set or the first song ready on a set. So I'll just make sure that all of the song or the specific patch on the Ableton or APC is for the first song of the set. So he doesn't have to go over there and start toggling and kind of do that. So he can kind of just go up there and plug in his ears and go.
Now, I know Aaron's got an array of pedals underneath his keyboards that allow him to do all sorts of things, from process the sounds to adjust the levels in his monitor mix to communicate with the other band members. Sack Lunch on Fantasy Tour asked, what kind of pedals does Magner like to use coming out of his various synths and keyboards? In his latest rig rundown, he seemed to be using the Strymon digital delay and some sort of phase shifting pedal.
Right now, he is only using a delay pedal on the Prophet 6. That's the Strymon that I believe he's speaking of. Below the keyboards, he has an array of sustain pedals, a volume pedal for the Leslie and organ. He also has a volume pedal, a boost pedal that is controlled by Brian, our monitor engineer, and that gives more of Barber when Aaron wants it. So if they're in a jam and he wants to kind of bring Barber in and out, he has control without having to get Brian to change his mix, just in case, it's just kind of in a jam or in a vibe situation. He doesn't want to really change his mix. He just wants to give it a little boost or take a little bit away. He has a Nemesis delay pedal on the Montage, and then he has the Pill side compression, ducking pedals that we mentioned, and that's pretty much all for pedals in Aaron's world.
On the subject of the Pill, Pudge Low asks, the Pill has become the best part of the band's sound, in my opinion, in recent years. It really adds to the entire sound of the band and has always caught my ear. How and whose idea was it to get it incorporated into the band? And I notice on Magner's rig, he has 2 of them running at a time. What is the rationale for having multiple Pills? And maybe for everyone's sake, explain what the Pill is. You've said it has to do with sidechain, but please explain what the Pill is and what it does.
The Pill is a side compression ducking pedal, so it's going to be taking the audio in, and what you're going to be hearing out, especially with this pedal specifically with 3 knobs, is controlling the rate and the tone and the volume of the pedal. But it creates that wobble sound. So whatever sound you're putting into it is going to be going with the tempo of the click or the tap tempo that the band has created coming from Alan's world. The magic kind of in it is that Mark, Barber, and Aaron are all on the same tempo, and that's coming from Alan, and that's all coming fed from Alan into Monitor World, and then Monitor World is feeding the side compression pedals, so they're all in the same time. And I think the magic is the glue that it creates, so everybody on stage is just breathing and feeling that wobble, and there's not like this guy is over here and this is over here. Everybody is just feeling it, and then the crowd is feeling it, and obviously Rich is mixing it that way, so it creates that that disco, that dance for sure.
So are the individual band members' Pills synced to one another as well as to the kick via Ableton, or how does that work?
They're getting, inputs from those specific keyboards. So when Mark's world, the Moog is going into the side compression pedal, and in Aaron's world, the Montage and the Virus, and that's why he has 2 individual compression pedals. But also I think it's because when you bring them in and out, there's that depth, there's that kind of variety there. And there's already something where when you bring it in, it creates a whole different moment. And then when you bring it out, it does that whole different thing. And you're still only playing the same loop. So it's kind of like, again, like that, for lack of better terms, just like that magic in that pedal. But it's being the click is coming from Alan's Ableton, and our monitor engineer, Brian, is getting that. So everyone can get that either in their ears or into the pedals. So that's being sent via Monitor World to the pedals, and then out of the pedals, to that keyboard, and then out to where you guys hear it.
Do the individual band members have to sort of accept the sidechain, or How does that work in the moment when Alan is playing to the click and everyone else ends up with that sidechain ducking? Does each individual band member need to switch that on via their pill, or is someone centrally operating that for everybody?
No, they can turn it on and off. It's just it is just a, in it's a guitar pedal, so it does have on and off. And then there's 3 knobs on it that they can kind of control different, parameters and settings. But when they feel like turning it on or off, they get to choose. It's not just kind of like all on or off. Sometimes Aaron's using it and Mark's not. And sometimes, Mark is only using it when he's using his Moog, the Moog Little Fatty. It's not in his other pedal board world. But with Aaron, he uses it freely. Yeah, just whenever he kind of feels it.
What is the mechanism by which the samples get synced? Because I know that has been the biggest challenge with the samples, at least at first it was, making sure the samples lined up with the kick or with the overall rhythmic progression of what the band is doing. And we heard it in that example from Orc Theme from Electric Forest, where it was pretty well dialed in. But if you compare it back to some of the earlier examples of the more complex samples used during the Why We Dance tour, I know Aaron has felt like he could always get a little bit better on Teardrops, for example. And, there have been other samples that the first time maybe it didn't work as well. The second time he dialed it in. Is that a matter of human effort, or is it a technological consideration, or a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B?
I think it's a little bit of both column A and column B. I think Aaron's getting, just with anything in life, you're going to get better at as the more you do. And I think he is one that likes to give himself a challenge. So he is, I think, getting better at just programming and working and editing the samples. But also Aaron and Alan are both synced Ableton wise. So we run a Cat5 cable from Ableton A, let's call it Alan's computer, to Aaron's computer B. So whoever is controlling the tempo, the click, the tap tempo, they have control over it. But both of their computers, when they drop samples, whether it's Alan dropping a drum sample or Aaron dropping a keyboard sample, it's in sync. So that's kind of also been the glue and or why things are, in sync and or with the samples better, like you said, for Electric Forest, and having with Orc Theme, the kick and stuff. Also, they work on that stuff a lot, whether it's individually and the day of rehearsal day, stuff like that. Those things are definitely being worked on for sure.
Are you aware of the samples that Aaron is working on and working with before he drops them, or do they surprise you as much as they surprise the rest of the audience?
Sometimes I'm really surprised. And then sometimes, you're hearing them either work on stuff at sound check or at rehearsal, in the rehearsal room, and you could see, but sometimes you don't know if they're working on stuff for 2 or 3 days from now. Especially when we're on tour, because that's kind of how tours work. You just kind of have to work your time differently, and not every day you're going to be able to work on something that you're going to play that night. So sometimes I don't know, and I'm surprised just as the crowd. Yeah.
So on the subject of looping and sequencing, Guitar Guy 1987 asked, I know that Magner has dabbled in live looping with his lines and also uses the Virus sequencer in some jams, namely some recent Orc themes. Does he have the ability to live loop the other band members? It would be really cool if he could recognize that the band hit a great theme during a jam and start looping each member's parts, or have them layer on top while he does a live Ableton edit of the original loops.
He doesn't now, but that is definitely possible. And I like where this guy is going with that idea. That is definitely feasible. You know, they do that with other bands where there's live looping going on, and there's one person who is maybe the master, you know, looper controller of that, and then he could do live looping and editing on the spot and put it out. A lot of the times I think that's what Pretty Lights is doing. You know, he has a live band and he has a way of looping said guitar player or keyboard parts and stuff and bringing it in and out, and then they could be playing other stuff at the same time. And but no, it's definitely feasible. We're not doing that now, but that doesn't mean that we'll never not try. I do like that idea. Yeah.
Well, along similar lines, Rook7279 said, I think it'd be cool if Magner had some global controls over the whole band's sound, particularly being able to do a classic style high or low pass filter sweep when they're doing big buildups or drops. Is that something that is technically, theoretically possible for Magner to kind of sculpt the sound of the entire band through filters and other sorts of effects?
It would be possible. I'd have to think about some workarounds with that. I think there'd be definitely some walls to hurdle, but just like with anything, you know, there's definitely, when there's a will, there's a way. And I feel like with technology, there's always somebody that knows something more than you. So there's somebody crazy out there that has done this before or doing it right now as we speak. So I wouldn't say that it can't particularly be done. What we have talked about, though, which is really cool, is something where whether Alan is doing a drum riser or drum loop, you know, via his sampler, and that is getting fed back to Aaron, and then he's able to sculpt that riser in real time. So being able to do some of these sweeps and filters, as you would say, or delays, you know, but all via Ableton and the APC. We've definitely talked about kind of how cool that possibility would be.
Wow. Well, whenever I ask fans what they want to ask the crew, and specifically around Magner, it's inevitable that someone will bring up the Gates of Hell. Now, are you familiar with the Gates of Hell?
I don't think so. I'm not.
Well, I'm about to play it for you.
Okay.
So that particular synth sound, and we're here listening to a little snippet of Jigsaw Earth from Princeton, New Jersey on November 9th, 2000. That synth sound was one of the signature sounds in Magner's arsenal in around 2000.
And it was called Gates of Hell.
I don't know if that's the official name or if it's just what we called it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was recently brought to my attention that this is a preset on the Korg MS-2000.
Okay.
And Toby Nicastro helped me understand this. He said the Gates of Hell, along with a host of other quintessential early Magner sounds, were part of the Korg MS-2000, which are often overshadowed by the JP-8000 in terms of significance in the development of the band's unique sound, but it was just as important. Are you familiar with the Korg MS-2000?
I love the Korg MS-2000. It's like the grandfather or father to the Micro Korg. So the Micro Korg came, popular in the early 2000s, like 2010s, as just kind of the go-to cheaper $350, $400 synth that like most people had in their studio. It had small keys and only 37 of them, but you had a lot of different variables with parameters, and it was a really for the price, a really fun synth. But it had the same engine as the MS-2000, its dad, but the bigger one, the MS-2000B, I think, had bigger keys and a lot easier to play. And I remember seeing the bass player or the guitar player / keyboard player from Lotus play it very long time ago when he used to play at the music venue that I started at in like 2005. So that was like my first kind of like welcoming to it. And then I've owned a microKORG myself, among like other synths and stuff, but not an MS-2000. I didn't know that Aaron actually used one, but right now we use the JP8000. I think has a similar, I think it has a similar patch in there. It's not obviously labeled Gates of Hell, but I think he has played something similar in the JP8000.
Well, on that subject, Custy the Wook Slayer, I feel like such an idiot reading people's fantasy tour screen names, but Custy the Wook Slayer asks, I'd love to hear Ben's feelings toward the JP8000. As time went on and as the band and technology evolved, Magner still has it on stage, but is it ever used anymore? So, of course, historically, the JP8000 is sort of the device that catalyzes the Disco Biscuits into existence. I mean, they already existed, but it really is, in the mythos of the band, it is the equivalent of the flaming pie. That gave the Beatles their mission. It is what turned the Biscuits into the Biscuits.
Yeah.
Is it still part of Magner's stage setup?
Yes, it's definitely still part of his setup. And I was just kind of thinking about, in terms of maybe how much it's got used in the past or now. I think, sometimes when you find a love for a new keyboard and it's kind of, opening up or giving you more creativeness or, kind of stirring up some stuff, you gravitate to be playing that a little bit more, which he has been as of late with the Yamaha Montage. But with the JP8000, I think, for me, I've only been working with the band for 6 months or so I can't really say much as prior to that. And I don't have much knowledge of what the gear was being used and songs that it was being used on. But I know specifically that the JP8000 has certain patches on it that he does play for certain songs. I'm learning all those songs. I feel like, with a band that's been around for 30 years and me only working with them for 6+ months, it's like us being around right now in this current timeline for as long as like the Earth's been around. And I'm still kind of like finding my way. But I love the JP8000. I think it has some really interesting sounds in it that like I haven't really heard in other keyboards or synths. And it has some really cool appreciators and stuff. And I know that I'm like forgetting the songs that he uses them on, but it's always like the go-to. It's like, okay, if we're playing this certain song, that he is always setting that up, just even for, a trail sound, something that's just like has always been there and it always will be. So I definitely think it's still important to his setup and like the overall sound of the band, and set.
With all of the advances in technology and the use of Ableton and samples, I wonder to what extent do individual keyboards still matter when many sounds and effects can be synthesized or turned into a plugin? Why bother still carrying around all of these keyboards, spending all this time and effort to set them up, to lug them from show to show? I know that BARBER, for example, is remarkably unsentimental about gear, and that he has really embraced the Line 6 Helix and its ability to streamline his setup to get away from having all of these individual pedals and to be using essentially emulations of a lot of the devices that he used to previously have, physical, tangible, breakable, fussy devices that he had to actually operate on stage. it's a loaded question because I'm not necessarily in favor of it, but could you ever envision a scenario where, Magner just has a singular keyboard and a bank of computers, or will there always be a place for these for the MS-2000, for the JP-8000, for the Montage, or these individual devices that have their own character, that have their own ineffable qualities that Magner or another keyboard player would just going to always want to be able to tap into?
I think it's kind of a mixed bag, because I believe in the technology side of it, where I've worked for keyboard players that have 2 keyboards and they have 2 laptops and they have the set in the program, in the software. And when they bring up that one song, it changes both keyboards and it has both sounds exactly where they need it and want, and they're playing the same. It's kind of, it depends on the band and the flow and the artist. It has those variables where if you're working in a band or you're an artist and you're playing the same set every night, I could see working with 1 keyboard or 2 keyboards and having it programmed where you increment and decrement to that song title, and it brings up again like the certain patches. In Aaron's world, I think he likes the versatility of having multiple things being able to go on, but then also being a player myself, sometimes you become accustomed or muscle memory to a specific keyboard. It's not always the sound as much as the feel. And sometimes the feel creates the sound, and vice versa. So if you made that sound on the JP-8000 and you play it a certain way, there's nothing that can emulate that. You can put it into another MIDI controller, but maybe that keybed does not feel that way. So when you play that keybed, you're not feeling that vibe or that bounce or that energy that you're particularly used to. Now, some people can get kind of past that, because with guitar pedals, I think it's different because you're changing the parameters and turning them on and off. And you might not be doing as much kind of exploring in the moment. But with Aaron, he's finding a patch and he's changing the parameters and stuff. So there's kind of a feel and a familiarity to that. We have, though, talked about narrowing it down and doing more just on the Montage, because the Montage is a workstation and that can do pretty much anything you want. So if there was a time where we could take the said sounds, patches, or samples from a JP-8000, we could import that into the Montage, and that could be something, and or finding something similar. But then again, it's kind of all Aaron's choices to, if he wants to kind of say goodbye to an old friend. It kind of turns into those moments.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, speaking of old friends, Mike DeGennaro asks, is the clavinet dead? I know it's probably a nightmare to tour with and keep in tune and running, but the funk that oozes out of it is worth it.
I love clavinets. The clavinet is not dead. It is at the warehouse with all the rest of the gear. I think it was just taken off the road I'm not sure of when it was, but it was taken off the road before my time. I wasn't really told really why, other than it is only very one-dimensional keyboard. It is just that sound. It is the funk sound, and it is very expressive because it is actually a mechanical thing hitting a string, right? And you do, have it going through an amp, and you can get some really cool, like real funk sounds out of it. But it is only just that. And you can kind of, again, like we were just saying about narrowing things down or streamlining or making things more efficient. I think that all kind of came into conversation and was like, do we need to bring this instrument that has to be tuned? That could, it needs a little more TLC and overall maintenance, than another keyboard. And you can really get that sound from the Montage with a little bit of, EQing or and such.
Well, one last question about Aaron's gear before we move on, and that is from another name that makes me feel ridiculous, saying Bisco Jesus asks, can you share Aaron's organ drawbar settings, please?
Oh, I wish I had the numbers off the top of my head. I think they're in my notebook somewhere, but I could maybe drop them to you to put like in a post. But
we could put them in the show notes, or we could post them on the Touchdowns All Day.
He
Instagram.
does have, he does have kind of like a go-to setting that he starts with, and then again, like it's kind of the specialty of the improv is you don't really know where you need to kind of sit with the organ. So sometimes he's sculpting in real time. And there's also with that Hammond XK5, it's pretty amazing because there is tons of different settings and presets. So you can have organ settings with some effects on it, whether it's reverb or some overdrive. And then obviously the percussion of the organ as well, and then he could easily just hit a button and it can go to a completely different organ that has a completely different parameter of effects and sounds on it. So it's really hip.
Is there one piece of gear that you'd love for Aaron to have that he doesn't currently have? Something that you're kind of in his ear about, like, have you ever thought of the fill in the blank?
He owns it. He just doesn't want to bring it on the road. We both have a synth called the ASM. Ashon Machines is the company, but they make something called the Hydra synth. And one of the keyboardists that I worked for in the past couple of years, he's endorsed by this company, and I was lucky enough to meet them in Germany when I was there. And I got one of their keyboards, and I just think that it's really amazing. It's very expressive. It has poly aftertouch, which means when you're pressing the key, it makes one sound, but when you press harder, it makes another sound. So it's just one of those things where we already have enough keyboards in his setup, for sure. So we don't need any more, but it's one of those things. If I was going to replace one that he doesn't really use all the time, I would replace it with that because I love it. But he does have one of my other favorite synths, which is the Prophet 6. So yeah, I don't really think I would change much in his setup, but that is one thing that I would possibly add one day.
Pretty sure I've seen that Hydra synth in John's basement. I think that it gets a lot of use in the recording studio.
Okay, right on. Yeah, it's a really, really cool keyboard. It's got some cool, really cool stuff in it.
So I'd like to switch gears, talk about the other part of your job, but as a kind of a way of bridge between the Magner section of the interview and the Mark section of the interview. I'd love to know, do you have a favorite Biscuits song or songs? I know that you came to the Biscuits from Twiddle and you didn't necessarily consider yourself to be a big Biscuits fan beforehand, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about their music. What draws you to it? What gets you most excited when you see it in a set list or when you hear them on stage playing?
Right now, right now I'm really loving Fire Will Exchange. I think that's my favorite song, right now. When I hear it or when I see it on the set, I'm excited to see it and hear it. I really just, have been digging just the improv of the band and, not really listening to them much or being able to see them live and or over the years, maybe sharing stages at certain festivals and only being able to catch a minute here, a minute there, not really getting the whole gambit of the Disco Biscuits. I think that I just really dig the improv and more importantly, how they just listen to each other. And you could really kind of see and hear the 30 years of them playing, with one another. And they're all really great listeners. and you could really just kind of hear that in the jams, and everyone kind of is allotted time to talk. And in any conversation,
Ben, we seem to
is
have lost
important
you.
to listen, to hear, everything that's going on, particularly on stage, but also at the same time go with the vibe and the feeling that's happening. And I think over the years, especially them being a band for 30 years, you really can't kind of take that for granted. So you just, hear that in the jams. And that's what I've been really kind of digging as of late.
Well, let's shift gears and move one man over on the stage to the one and only Mark Brownstein. I would have thought that Mark's setup being a bass player was far more simple and streamlined than Aaron's. But in the 2024 rig rundown that Mark did for the Storm Sound blog, I learned that his setup is pretty complex too, and that Mark is constantly experimenting with new gear. So
it's true.
To start things off, can you sum up Mark's bass sound? And I'll qualify that by saying when we had Nick on, he was able to sum up BARBER's sound in terms of, like the chiming single notes, a lot of delay, the Fuchs amp that he used to use that created a lot of his signature sound. Is there a version of that for Mark? Like, would you be able to just summarize what Mark sounds like and what he relies on to create that sound?
I think the most important thing in Mark's rig is really his hands. That's Mark's sound, and I think will always be. And the most important thing kind of a bass player can kind of have is their hands and their tone. But when you look at, Mark's like bass head, it's flat. His EQ is flat. A lot of, other bass players might sculpt some things out and EQ it a certain way, but, Mark's sound comes from his hands and his bass, and he's been playing the same bass for, 4+ years with the Elric. And he likes, that low subby DJ kind of bass dance sound. And he can get that with minimal. I mean, there's a lot going on, but what he's using at any given time is not a lot. So, he does have a lot of pedals, which is in the rack behind him. And what's in front of him is more of a MIDI switcher. So instead of being able to turn a pedal on and off at his feet, he's turning the pedal technically on and off via MIDI, and that's going to the rack behind him. So all of his settings can stay as he likes them in the rack, and all he is just turning them on and off. And then he has the capabilities of combining certain pedals at one time. So he has like an option, say option A would be EQ pedal and also his Mutron pedal. So he could have both of those being turned on at one time, especially if he's looking for that sound or tone, in a song or jam. But I think, yeah, it's not as much as the amp, or it's not as much as the speakers, and it's not the pedals. At the end of the day, I think that Mark can plug his Elric into any bass amp or cab, and it would be Mark Brownstein.
Amazing. You mentioned that Mark has played the Elric for going on 2 decades. What makes an Elric special?
Being that I've only been one with the instrument for the last like 6 months or so, I'm just amazed on how it was crafted, and well crafted and well built, and how it holds a tune. And again, like, I think, people find their instrument, and then they find their sound within that instrument. And Mark found his Elric, or the Elric found him. So I think it's just a great sounding bass. He has other basses on the road that we use. He has a modulus that we use for rehearsal, and then we have a backup bass with he has an Ibanez, which is like a custom Ibanez with really cool like Disco Biscuit logo inlays. And that's really just there in the case of an emergency. But we've been just using the Elric, solely on the road.
So you mentioned some of the pedals, the Mutron pedals specifically. What are Mark's go-to pedals, the pedals that we might be most familiar with?
I think what you would probably hear a lot in mixes would be his EQ pedal and his octave pedal. So the octave pedal can drop you down a certain octave, so you're in a lower range, being that he plays a 5-string, but he could be playing the other 4 strings and be in the octave range that he desires. And then with the EQ, it's just boosting a certain frequency that he desires to really kind of really take over that low end, and really get those people just going.
So both Patty Donnelly and James Stidham want to know what's behind Mark's recent switch from Aguilar to Bergantino amps.
I think he fell in love with Bergantino on a gig, or that I think initially he saw Karina Reichman playing a Bergantino setup, and also Mike Gordon was giving a gig run or a gear rundown rather of his new setup, because he went a different direction with his bass as well, and he's been rocking Bergantino. I think Mark was up in Vermont playing at Nectar's, and they have a Bergantino bass backline set up, and he played it during maybe a Brownstein family band show, and just fell in love with it and said, like, I have to see what I have to do to get them to, give me one for the biscuits. So wow. Actually the Bergantino family came down to our gig and brought the bass head, and Jim Bergantino himself showed me exactly, what's special about their digital bass head. And it really has kind of, I think, changed just the overall, not overall sound, but just the overall kind of vibe of bass world in general. It just like it was a noticeable difference that everyone heard. And especially, Rich at Front of House said that he can definitely hear it in the recording. So that is something that, makes Mark happy. And I really enjoy their product. They just gave us a Bluetooth pedal that can control the head behind him, so he can mute it or turn the boost or the drive on and off, which is nice. That's something where, again, like as a bass player, you can't really take your hands off the bass. So something that you might want to do a little more freely, now you can do with Bluetooth, which is cool.
Evan Kahn asked if you could share some examples of what effects make up Mark's sub bass, synth bass, and also his normal tone.
Well, he has the Moog. Let's see. On that side of things, he has the Moog Little Fatty. He has a pedal board that's pretty minimal. There is only just the pill pedal that we spoke about previously that gives him side compression on the Moog Little Fatty. He has a Moog expression pedal that gives him filter sweep, or however we want to program certain, that patch. That pedal can kind of be mapped to do a number of things, whether it's volume or swell or control filters. And then I have set up a MIDI foot switch that was given to me from BARBER, actually, and saying that he was using one in his studio with his Little Fatty to be able to control the patches on the keyboard and not have to take your hands off of the keyboard, which is what Mark and I talked about early on, me starting with the band, was that he wanted to be able to play the sub bass and change patches in a jam or a song, but not have to take one of his hands off to change the patch. So I set up a MIDI controller, so all he has to do is press the patch with his feet, and it changes the patch on the keyboard. So then it just seamlessly changes from patch to patch.
That's great. And in Mark's rig rundown, he talked about how much more comfortable that's made him, where he doesn't have to manually take a hand off the keyboard and scroll through an entire suite of sounds to get to the one he wants. He can just hit that foot pedal and immediately be in it.
Mm-hmm. And more importantly, keep his hands there, because he does a lot of parameter changes and sweeping with filters with his hands, or one hand rather, as well as with the feet. So it's nice if he's going from patch to patch, because one sound could be, especially if you're scrolling and you don't have it set up the way we have it, you might be on patch 33 and then you want to go to patch 95, and it's not as easy as just typing in like a number or something, which would make more sense. You have to just scroll through 60 other patches. So this setup is that he can just hit one button with his foot that goes to a designated number, and then I have it set up to, I have it like a hotkey. So all he has to do is press on another button, and that brings him to his designated patch that he wants.
That's great. The Moog bass has really been a huge, huge part of the band sound. Just the tractor beam sound, but the Biscuits in the Set Break Is Over era in general, I think that more often than not, the most notable jams feature Mark stepping over to the Moog. And I'm wondering if you can help us to better understand how you and he are working, apart from streamlining the patch selection, but to make this new tool something that Mark feels as comfortable on as he does on his Elric.
I think there was a couple certain changes from over the years that he just kind of either dealt with or just didn't end up saying anything. So when I joined, we changed some pedal board formation around, and I also suggested moving the Moog a certain way, so he has more of a flow downstage. And I think overall, just being that we have talked about, handoffs and the times that he wants to solely go on to the Moog, that I'm just there ready. I'm ready for him to kind of give me a look or a signal of some sort, and I go over and I grab the bass from him, and he can go right into the Moog. I think more importantly, the Moog has become his sound because he's worked with the Moog a little bit more and has found more sounds to his liking and things that have just like kind of worked in more of an overall sense. The foot switch is, just gives you a little more freedom. And I think at the end of the day, like we've talked about, when the artist can kind of go up there and think freely or not think at all and kind of can just have fun, which every time Mark goes to the Moog, he's having fun. So I think like when you have that, you just want more of it. So I think that's why he's been gravitating, towards playing the Moog more, or featuring it more in the set, rather.
Inhale to Yoni wanted to know, what would you see, Ben, as the future potential for the Moog, and how can it continue to affect the band's sound? Are there untapped capabilities that you and Mark are still figuring out how to incorporate?
So my goal soon is to be able to hook up another MIDI controller to the Moog, so he could be playing the bass sounds with his feet. So instead of his hands, he could also control it with his feet. So if he is playing with his hands with the Elric, he could also be holding down whole notes with his feet. So that is a goal of mine. And then also potentially hooking up his laptop to the Moog and being able to upload certain plugins and sounds that he has created, and being able to use those. So not just only using Moog sounds, but the Moog has an editing library where you can import and export kind of sounds and patches and stuff. So kind of going more in depth with that. So if there are, more future Tractor Beam sets or shows, and or just kind of having more of a concentration with the Moog, that he does, he doesn't have to just be concreted in with just using one sound or patch.
One of the most exciting things to me about the new sound, the new tools, the Moog in particular, is that it seems like the Moog led jams, Doorbell, for example, provide this almost infinite possibility in terms of the ability to spin off new sounds and styles and songs.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that John and Joey have been working a bit on some new material that is derived from some of the jams that have come out of, for example, Doorbell, which is interesting because Doorbell, of course, came from a jam, a Moog jam of By the Time. And so we're seeing that anytime Mark is on the Moog, it almost represents a very fertile song generating machine.
Mm-hmm.
They're finding new sounds and new directions. And it's interesting because in some ways the Moog is it seems like a more limited instrument than Mark's Elric. The range of sounds that Mark is getting out of it is not necessarily as diverse as what he is getting out of the Elric, but yet the limitations seem to be fostering amazing creativity and inspiring the band quite a bit. And I liked how you mentioned that every time Mark puts down the Elric and goes over to the Moog, he's happy, he's excited, it's fun. And it's also, it seems inspiring.
I agree with all of that, and it's different because I feel like it's a whole different kind of beast. But just with the Moog and maybe its limitations, that is something where less is more. And now Mark being more of a DJ Brownie, he's seeing that consistency and just a solid bass sound throughout really gets people dancing. And once you have people dancing and you get that whole vibe and energy, then music is limitless. It can kind of go anywhere. But as long as you have that glue and that nice solid 4-on-the-4 click or kick rather, and the bass, then it's like a solid foundation. Once you have a solid foundation, you could build a beautiful house. But if you don't really have anything really there, it's just going to kind of like crumble. So I think with the Moog, it just gives that forever foundation and glue that the rest of the band really feeds off of. And then these jams, and then these like jams that turn into songs, that turn into sub jams, that turn into new songs, can just kind of evolve and just keep going.
Alex Halliday wants to know, with Mark using the Moog more, is there anything that you learned or used in Magner's setup that you're now incorporating into Brownie's keyboard bass setup?
I was fortunate that I actually own a Moog Little Fatty, so I had experience with the Moog prior to joining them, so I had a little knowledge of the workaround. And then recently, when we added the MIDI controller setup, I actually bought myself one too, so I could have one at home and kind of just mirror it. So if there was anything that Mark wanted and told me to figure out, I can kind of do at home prior to the gig. But overall, Moog makes some of the best synths that have ever been created. So I'm glad that we have, some of their stuff on stage for sure.
Now, I'm really curious. You mentioned, and Mark mentioned it in his rig rundown as well, that you're working on a foot controller that will allow him to play the Moog while he's simultaneously playing the Elric.
Mm-hmm.
What do you envision as being the application of that? Like almost having two bass players, or Mark being able to almost not solo, because bass solos aren't really a thing in the Disco Biscuits, but Mark being able to be a little more free on the Elric because the Moog is holding down the that kind of tractor beam style bass line?
I think it kind of opens him up for easier transitions. So if he's in a situation where he's feeling like going to the Moog or the bass or vice versa, he could be holding a note. So then he could be grabbing the bass from me or handing the bass off to me, and then being able to go to said instrument and there not be a dropout in sound.
Gotcha.
So, especially in a jam where there might be like a riser or a big hit, again, the MIDI controller foot pedal could be controlling a certain sound, but doesn't really need to be on that certain patch. So it could be another sound altogether. It could be coming from Ableton. There could be a number of possibilities in the future, but I was just specifically thinking of him being able to hold down a whole note of that said patch that he would be on, look over to me going, I'm kind of ready for my bass, and be able to give him his bass. He's still holding down that whole note. It's carrying that ominous kind of frequency, and then he can grab his bass and start slapping away on the Elric,
When can we expect to see this on stage? Because it sounds really cool.
Yeah, I've been kind of just working on a certain workaround with running two different MIDI devices at the same time, being that one MIDI device on the Moog is run MIDI via USB, and then one MIDI device is actually run by MIDI, like DIN, so 5-pin. So it's telling, or the device itself is telling it to do two different things. So my goal is I have to get this other device called a MIDI combiner, so both MIDI devices can go into one, and it could spit out information as well. So that's another reason why I have kind of a duplicate rig at home, so I could experiment and mess around before I kind of waste time on stage, which we don't really have, nor does the crew have, and the band, and so.
Definitely during festival season, time is of the essence. So
very much so.
You're not setting up and having 3 days in one location to play around for the next, coming up soon.
Yes. Yeah. Coming up, Bisco Land will be kind of great just because we'll be able to set up, and because we are the headliners and it's our festival, that we have the day to work on said gear and stuff, because shortly thereafter Bisco Land, we have like about 2 or 3 days off, and then we start our summer fest or tour. So we won't really have much time to work on gear or said things that might need fixing. So it's a good time to take care of some of that stuff and to just experiment and see again, like some things that we've wanted to work on or do that we could do, because we'll have the time allotted to us.
So as good as you and the rest of the crew are, sometimes things go sideways. And we all know those moments occur. And I think the true tell of the quality of this crew is how quickly you guys rebound. But we had a question come in from House Llama, and they ask, I think something I'm interested in from the guys is when things don't work regarding tech. Like, no biggie, these things happen. And with the band scoring so many wins, I think it's worth noting that part of that is their recovery time and their ability to correct and change on the fly during jams. But say if the samples go south, or there's a tempo issue, or the computer glitches, Ben, what goes through your mind? How do you fix problems so quickly with everything else that's going on stage?
I think I could contribute it to, the years that I've been doing it, and you build up kind of a Rolodex in your head of troubleshooting. And a lot of times it's the same thing that might happen from band, artist, gig to gig. But I really work with some of the best crew that I've ever worked with, and they make my job and my life and troubleshooting when shit hits the fan that much easier. I work with some of the smartest guys, especially on stage. And if there's an issue, sometimes I can't fix it. Sometimes I don't know, because I'm just still, at least in this world, I'm still learning some gear, and they might have already seen this problem arise before. So I would have to say, especially like in the 6 months plus that I've worked with the Disco Biscuits, and where inevitably things will hit the fan, but if you are prepared and organized, you can welcome that naturally. And our ultimate goal as crew is to not allow the band or artist to feel that. So they can still be doing their job and still performing. And hopefully the fans don't really know or feel it, or it doesn't, as I would say, create a train wreck moment where the show is over. If that doesn't happen, it's a win. And if the artist still can perform, it's a win. But those things do happen. And because we are, like we said many times in this podcast, like pushing the envelope with technology. And when you are relying on computers and you are playing outside in 100-degree weather, a computer might fart. It will happen. But again, you want to be prepared for that. Know, okay, if this said thing happens, I'm going to do that. And then if that happens, X, Y, Z. But over the last 6 or so months, and when those things have come up, the crew have had my back and they have helped me tremendously. And I've learned, tenfold because of those things. So it's like, it's good that those things have, it's a bummer that those things have happened, and they might like either maybe not ruin a moment, but they'll throw a little wrench or a kink in the moment. But then it's so much of a learning experience for me. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. It's a trade-off. It's like, because now I know for next time. And then as long as you don't duplicate it, then mistakes are good, or, things that happen like this are important.
What's the scariest moment you ever had on stage with the Biscuits or any other act where something went sideways?
I think I was mixing at Red Rocks with Twiddle and Pigeons, and they were all on stage with a 15-piece choir for encore, and we didn't get a sound check, and everybody immediately, like all 20 people, were looking at me for their mix in a matter of 15 seconds, and having to dial it all in that matter of time before the band can't really do their job, and then the fans notice. I'm probably forgetting some other hardcore times, but that is definitely one that resonated in my brain first.
That's pretty terrifying. It's a pretty big stage.
Yeah, I think it was a sold out night too, with like 8,000 plus people, so you just feel that.
Well, Ben, looking ahead to Biscoland and beyond, what are you most excited about for the rest of 2024?
I think, again, just kind of continually making the rig and the gig more efficient and streamline. And again, our job is just to make it, like I've said many times, is just to make it, easier for them, which then makes it easier for us in return. But I think I'm just excited for where all of these songs are really going, especially the new ones and the new ones that I know that are coming right around the bend. And seeing where the band goes leading up to their 30th anniversary as a band, which I think, again, it's coming up rather quick, and 2025 will be here before we know it. And, then again, the sky's the limit, especially for this band and their fan base. I'm new to it, but knowing a lot of people who have been lifers and or have been fans of them for 15, 20 plus years, they say that this is a very special time in their in their career, their lifespan as a band. And I'm just very grateful and fortunate to be a part of it.
And we're fortunate to have you a part of it, because it is a truism, but I think it really is the case that the band plays better when they are supported by a highly competent professional crew. And Mark has said it on stage. He is not one who is prone to hyperbole. He is a tough taskmaster, but he has called you guys the best crew he's ever had. And so, as someone who enjoys the benefits of a happy band whose gear works and who is able to be creative without limit, who's got technology at their fingertips that works when it needs to, I am very grateful for you, Ben, for the rest of the crew, and for all of the hard work that you guys do day in, day out to make sure the band is as amazing as they possibly can be.
Thank you, Max. That means a lot. Much appreciated for sure. Like, it is really, really nice to hear from anyone that, is in our world, that they recognize what goes in and out, of our daily lives. And when Mark said that on stage, I was very touched. That doesn't happen often, that, an artist might say anything, especially on the microphone, to a crowd. And he's reiterated it, many times, even in private to me, that he's just, just very happy with how things have panned out. So that just makes you want to put more into it, and then again, it's just a reciprocal thing. So, no, thank you again. And I appreciate your words.
Well, yours is a great story. And hopefully, as I said at the outset of the interview, an inspiration to anyone who wants to work in the music industry. It's a story about the importance of saying yes, of hard work, of learning everyone's job, of doing everyone's job, and of professionalism, of showing up really ready to work and really ready to sacrifice in order to make sure that the band is ready to play. So, Ben, thank you so much for joining us on Touchdowns All Day, and I look forward to seeing you out on tour this summer.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Touchdowns All Day is an Osiris Media production. This episode was written, produced, and edited by me, Max Dawson, and was mixed and mastered by Matt Dwyer. Check us out on the web at www.touchdownsallday.com and use the hashtag TouchdownsAllDay on all social platforms. You can reach John at Barber Shreds, and I'm at FY Maxwell on X and Instagram. You can always reach us on the Touchdowns All Day hotline, 424-666-SIYD. This and every episode of Touchdowns All Day would not be possible without the contributions of many women and men, including the Disco Biscuits Road Crew. That's Ben, Nick, Brian, Rich, Dane, Amin, Herm, and Tara. The band itself, Mark, John, Aaron, and Alan. The management, Ben Baruch and Andrew Kaplan at 1111 Management. The Touchdowns All Day Advisory Committee, Andy Bazzani, Mike Walsh at the Biscuits Internet Project, Russ Tabes, Dave Cook at Fantasy Tour, Scott McClintock at Think Tank Dubs, Rich Steele, and Ian Armstrong. The coaches, Joey Friedman and Steve Monster Martocci. The piano medley you're listening to right now as our closing credit music is courtesy of Matt Schultz. Check out Matt online at YOBisco. And of course, as always, extra special thanks to Lisa Gutwillig, Deb Brownstein, Angelica Magner, Sandra O'Quinn, Andrea Rivers, and Avery McMahon. On behalf of John Barber and the entire Touchdowns All Day family, this is Max Dawson saying, see you next time.
We're mass communicate. We're mass communicate. Mass communicate.
Osiris.